I think we've all become acutely aware that from a data standpoint, we're asked to look critically at what we're doing for managing patients with aneurysm disease. And all of us hopefully have experience with open repair, and yet endovascular repair has been the mainstay of what we're doing these days. And this data has become even more critically important over the last 3 years. So I apologize for those of you who may have seen this presented at VEITH, but I think this is really quite revolutionary data. The first prospective randomized multi-center trial comparing the four largest largely used grafts here in the market, at least in the US. And again, this is 3-year outcomes with full intent to follow this data set out to 5 years, and we're even pushing hard to look longer because we realize that for many of our patients, even longer term data will be important. These are my disclosures, again, all related to participation in various aortic stent graft trials over the course of the last several decades. So the LEOPARD trial, for those of you, again, not familiar, was designed to prospectively look at outcomes in a randomized controlled fashion comparing EVAR devices. And there are a couple important points about this. This is a real-world patient population. In other words, you, if you were clinicians, were the ones who had to choose between randomizing between 2 devices. One of those would be the anatomically fixed AFX or AFX2 with their apply. And then you as the individual participant could also choose to use either Cook Zenith, Gore Excluder, or Endurant. For my personal choice at that point, I chose Zenith as the comparator graft, but some of my partners at the MGH may have used Excluder or Endurant. It was also important that we included numerous centers across the United States, so 80 different centers with an intended follow-up of 5 years, and again, over 400 patients. So when we look at how this broke down, in the end, we had 455 total patients, half in the anatomic fixation, half in the proximal fixation, and you can see it's a pretty even spread across those devices. Matt mentioned a little bit later on, we'll talk about the fact that there is now increasing data looking at durability in the devices on the right side, even out to 10 years. And so I think this is a very valid comparator group in terms of anatomic versus proximal fixation. You'll notice, as with most aneurysm repair trials, this is predominantly a male population at 90%. They often tend to be in their 7th and 8th decades of life. Over half were smokers in both groups, and a significant proportion had previous MI and or coronary disease. I'm not going to belabor the demographics, but just wanted to point out again, this is fairly typical in terms of both anesthesia risk, comorbidities, including hyperlipidemia, PAD, family history of aneurysm repair. So again, with this randomization, the groups did look very, very similar. And in terms of the types of aneurysms we were treating, these were fairly good-sized aneurysms, an average sac diameter of 5.5 centimeters. However, we really did emphasize we're trying to treat patients within the instructions for use for the device, because I think we've all come to realize that our very best outcomes with endovascular aneurysm repair are obtained when we stick to the IFUs, or we're being careful about the selection. So you'll see the relative breakdown, and yet if you look at the very bottom of the screen, I think it's important to note, since this was an investigator-driven trial, that in both groups, even though we intended to treat on the IFU, for a variety of reasons, the physicians in this study felt that their patient could be treated with both of the comparator and the anatomically fixed device, and a quarter of patients in both groups were treated off the IFU. And that becomes important when we start looking at the results, as you might imagine. Some of the other procedural characteristics were fairly similar in terms of things like anesthesia time, contrast load. Of note, 70%, close to 70% of the patients in both groups were treated percutaneously. I would argue that the general anesthesia rate is a little bit high, and in my practice, a significant proportion are now treated with TIVA under percutaneous access. And again, very, very low ICU time and hospital time in both groups. So one of the things we were trying to do is we realized that we're going to continue to look at the traditional methods of aneurysm outcome, including things like rupture, aneurysm-related mortality, reintervention rate, and endoleak, but we also wanted to see if we could come up with a new composite endpoint that would somehow combine these different endpoints in a single arc so that we would have a larger comparator to be able to really look at the overall outcome of aneurysm. So we included things like periprocedural death and rupture, but we included all endoleaks because we do think endoleaks are significant in terms of impacting our need for certainly surveillance and even the potential for reintervention, significant migration, significant aneurysm enlargement, or of course reintervention. And I want to point out here that at least from a statistical standpoint, there does seem to be a slight advantage for the anatomically fixed AFX device. But when we look at the clinical relevance, the vast majority of these did seem to be driven by type 2 endoleaks, which we're following, but it did not drive a huge difference in intervention. And that's what the next several slides will show. So this slide demonstrates that both cohorts had no significant difference in freedom from conversion to remove the graft. There was a difference in freedom from occlusion, and this was driven predominantly in the proximally fixed device by iliac limb occlusion. And I think that is important to remember as we think about tortuosity and anatomy and staying within the IFU in those areas. In addition, there was a difference between the AFX or the anatomically fixed group and the proximal group in terms of type 2 endoleaks. And when we looked at both all-cause mortality and freedom from aneurysm-related mortality out to 3 years, 36 months, there was no significant difference between either of those groups. And I think this is vitally important because as we hear about concerns and anecdote, all of us want to know that one, once the grafts are in, that our patients will not only do well initially, but will do well over the next 3 to 5 to 8 to even 10 years in some of our patient cohorts. Now, when we look at some of the other potential problem areas like type 1 and type 3 endoleak, at least out to 36 months, we've seen absolutely no difference between these two groups. Once again, I think we realize it's very important for us to continue to follow our patients very closely. This data is about to be published in the Journal of Vascular Surgery, and it is our intent to continue to follow these patients at least out to 5 years. And we're working on a plan to be able to even follow the data set longer than that because we think this will provide very helpful information, not just for AFX users, but for vascular surgeons and the vascular community as a whole to think about some of the longevity and durability issues for multiple graft types. Similarly, when we look at freedom from aneurysm rupture, there was really no significant difference between the groups. And also when we look at freedom for reintervention. If you look on the right side of the screen, I think it's important to note when we look at reasons for reintervention, endoleak type 1, endoleak type 2, endoleak type 3, limb occlusions, there is a little bit of a difference between the two groups. And I think that's relevant, particularly given Matt's earlier point. We know that every single one of the devices we currently put in today has failure modes and failure mechanisms. And as you're choosing a device or choosing a graft to treat this problem, I think you do have to keep those things in mind. But when we look at our need to reintervene, even our need to explant, at least in my personal opinion and from what we see from this data, it is actually spread across numerous devices at different time points as well. So some of the conclusions that we've drawn so far is this does provide level 1 evidence in a contemporary real-world population using commercially available devices. And I think this is critically important as a comparator for any new devices or any new trials going forward. It is the first randomized control trial with these contemporary devices and will be that important control group as we think about what's next, whether it's our Alto platform or new devices in the industry. It also showed that for the first time in a prospective randomized fashion that anatomic fixation, at least out to 3 years, performed as well as proximal fixation with no need for explant, reintervention, or some of the major endoleak problems that we were concerned about with the earlier generation PTFE configuration. I do think it's important as we start thinking about this, and one of the things we're starting to do is go back and look at the data, is to try and figure out which patients are going to be more predisposed to have problems. So we're looking at those patients who were treated outside the instructions for use. And is it one parameter, two parameters, three parameters? And are there different parameters that are more relevant for specific devices? And this is also, I think, useful information that will help us make better decisions going forward. And then once again, I think all of us would agree that there's need for continued long-term follow-up, not only in this cohort and patient population, but in all of our patients. And I realize that all of you are also hearing this mandate loud and clear from the SVS, from the FDA, from the payers, that we, as the vascular clinicians who follow and treat these patients, need to impress upon them and reinforce how critically important it is for them to have continued routine long-term follow-up, because we know there are some delayed mechanisms